I know you must have mixed feelings about seeing me. But I want you to know, I am so How can you forgive me so easily? I thought you would be furious with me.
Give us the fucking teaser video already!
Enough! Send him in!
A shot of Bezzy being dropped into the water, his entrance to the colony. I've seen some people say it looks horrible, but it's definitely very placeholdery, and I wouldn't expect it to look like this in the final game, so we'll skip it. Another shot of Bezzy, this time standing over the cliffside near the exchange zone, staring at the old camp. There's some snow in the mountains for some reason, and it wouldn't be so odd if it wasn't for the fact that it's only present on this very specific spot in the mountains. It's hard for me to say what's the reason for it, but if it's meant to harken back to the barrier is radioactive and changing the land idea that was alluded to by the devs, then I don't think I'll be a fan. The roofs of the old camp itself are now dull brown instead of the vibrant red, which is a shame because it used to match their faction color, essentially stolen from the Royal Guards. We see, in a quick succession, Bezzy attacking a wolf, and I won't really judge the entire design here, it's just a quick flash, but it seems fairly colorless. Then either a snapper or a razor, it's hard to tell since it doesn't particularly look like either of them, but my guess is that it's a razor, and then a water mage Bezzy attacking a group of goblins that made a Mad Max camp? First of all, the top of their game was cobbling together some crude armor, but now they erected a camp with giant spikes? I mean, maybe it's ruins of someone else's camp, but then why the spikes? Goblins in Gothic didn't like open spaces, they always hid in caves, and that's on top of the fact that the remake goblins aren't like the scaly reptiles shoved into a humanoid form, like the original, but they are simply standard fantasy goblins with a bit more toothy. Don't get me wrong, I like their creepy smiles, but the animalistic snouts and scales worked better to make them more unique and distinct. I will say though, from the little that we see of it, I do like the redesigned water mage robe, and the magic effects look good. We then see Bezzy running in a mine, which could be the entrance to the old mine, but doesn't really seem like it, so perhaps it's another location altogether? It could be the abandoned mine, meaning the devs are indeed expanding on some unused concepts from the original, but it's pure speculation. A shot of Bezzy exploring underwater, and considering that Szymon Żak is on the team, perhaps some inspiration was taken from Chronicles of Myrtana Archolos in that regard. I wouldn't complain, it would honestly be a massive addition to the original, and I'm all for it if that's the case. Here's an odd one, Bezzy seemingly being swallowed by darkness sprawling from the ground, in front of the shapeshifter's monastery? Don't get me wrong, I think adding new spells like that could be cool, but the monastery area is basically unrecognizable with a field of flowers to frolic in the front, and a completely revamped ruins behind the gate. We'll talk more about it later. We see a fire mage Bezzy casting spells against hairy mutant hounds from Fallout 4 with saber teeth? I think that these are meant to be orcish dogs, but if so, they are so unrecognizable that they might be a different creature altogether. They might be an attempt to fuse the Vargs from G2 with the orcish dogs of G1, but Vargs were already just a slight redesign of the original, and this barely looks like either of them. The weird pseudo-lion mane makes them look quite ridiculous, and it's not helped by the somewhat overdone burning effect. We see some scuffle between Bezzy and a Brotherhood member, though we only know it's somewhere in the swamp camp, we don't know exactly where. I do like the lighting and the atmosphere a lot in this shot, with the swamp trees obscuring the light and this greenish tint in the air. It's very cool and fitting.
Welcome to the Valley of Mines, an immense penal colony.
There's really no way to go around this. These aren't Gothic orcs, they're your standard fantasy orcs, with the biggest inspiration probably being Lord of the Rings. You could safely put these guys in the shadow of Mordor and no one would bat an eye. We also see something approximating desert plant life, I think, for some reason.
For the war against the orcs.
This orc armor is not great. It looks more like something out of Skyrim rather than Gothic, and it doesn't fit either the G1 or G2 aesthetic for them. Why not elaborate on the tribal, sort of lost technology style of the original, where orcs use rusty weapons and sort of mismatched pieces? Maybe even throw in rusty elements of the elite armor we'll then get to see in its full glory in the G2 remake. Just something more creative than slapping spikes on the Elder Scrolls orcs.
The only undefeated enemies of the Kingdom of Murtana. The king needed ore to supply his armies. So every man guilty of a crime, no matter how insignificant, was forced to work in the ore mines of Khorinis.
We see some locations from which the original mages created the barrier, and it's all well and good, though it raises the question of whether they really would need to construct this tower here specifically for this. But then they could just slap a pile of ore in some place and it would do. Still, I've ragged on so many things that I'm not going to pretend this is a problem.
Around the entire valley. But something disturbed the creation of the barrier, trapping everyone inside. The convicts revolted.
Same as with dropping Bez into the water shot, I'm not going to criticize this, even though it does look pretty funny.
And took control of the colony. They divided.
This look at the inner courtyard is amazing, and I can't wait to see more of it, especially in this lighting. I think that this right here really nails the atmosphere.
Into 3 camps.
Then we see this shot of a camp, and it looks pretty good, though making the bridge huge and slapping random spikes on it, and things like keeping the banners of a hated king is just stuff that was thrown in there for no reason. And the banner actually seems like a lore error.
Camp is satisfied with the current situation. As long as they deliver the ore, the king supplies them with everything they need.
This shot of the new camp at night is amazing, no complaints here. At least I hope it's night and that it's not this dark all the time.
The new camp, however, thinks they can use the ore to blow up the barrier. And then there is
the swamp camp seems to have been largely changed, the most out of all the camps at least, and I'll withhold the opinion on that until we see more. But I gotta say, was a big red altar saying the sleeper is an evil demon really necessary? Who would look at this and not think to themselves, wow, this seems like an evil cult? Do we really need to make the twist so obvious? Why not lean more into the mysticism angle rather than go with this?
Deity will free them from their prison. Thus begins your journey in the open world of the Valley of Mines. Creating Gothic Remake, we focus on the
Here we get a good shot at our boy Diego. His armor is just kind of okay, dropping a lot of the color, but his face looks so much better than in the initial screenshots. He looks a little bit less like the Wicked Witch of the West, though I still think that he should keep a gentleman's mustache. We do know there are razors in the colony, and the inmates do use them.
4 pillars that we consider the core of the series. Simulation of a living world, exploration, story, and combat. Like the original 2001 title, Gothic Remake is set on
we see Choristo in an absolutely god-awful redesign of a heavy fire mage robe, where it looks like he's covered in layers of metal, though it could be some really wonky looking leather. What was the reason for that? The robe's protection, already not amazing as it was, came seemingly from it being enchanted, not from the robe's materials. It just looks overdone. And there's some stained glass in the background. And I've got 2 questions. Question number 1, how was it added? Did the fire mages just happen to have a glassmaker amongst them when they were trapped? Because that building most likely was never meant to serve a religious purpose. It was a tiny castle meant to oversee one valley, and the fire mages only came there after Robar sent them to create the barrier. Just like the arena was likely never meant to be one, with the prisoners transforming what was in all likelihood a training square into it. And in the remake it is now a giant Mad Max arena, so this building too is no longer repurposed to fit the needs of those trapped behind the barrier. But instead it was always meant to be a chapel now, which I think is kind of lame. It was cool to see how the circumstances of the barrier forced people to use existing structures, similar to how the old camp guards occupy the rest of the castle and even use the old dungeons, or how the sect camp was built next to the old temple due to a vision from the Sleeper, telling his followers to worship him there. And not to mention, the stained glass doesn't even fit the occultist vibe of the G1 Fire Mages, and instead seems to be an attempt to connect them more with the G2 Fire Mages, who are less inspired by the occult and more inspired by the Catholic Church. And I just gotta ask, wouldn't it make more sense and be way cooler and more unique to do it the other way around and make the Monastery from G2 more occultist if or when the G2 remake comes, rather than to make the G1 mages more generic? Don't get me wrong, I love G2, but replacing the unique take on the good mages, so to speak, with the more archetypical fantasy depiction of such a group always felt like a misstep, though they were still depicted well. Wouldn't it make more sense with the power of hindsight to connect things to be more like G1 and not the other way around? And all of that is kind of secondary to my, well, second question, which is that just straight up Christian imagery? What scene from the actual mythology of this world is this meant to depict? Like, I'm not crazy here, am I? Is this Jesus Christ in Gothic? Because that's certainly one crossover I did not expect. I was more so expecting to see Mud in Dead by Daylight.
Creating an immersive and realistic world. Enjoy a complex life simulation.
Nice cut, bro. Doesn't exactly fit the setting, but whatever, this is a minor infraction. This here is not a minor infraction, because we see diggers with their work clothes exposing their toes, therefore largely defeating the purpose of it. As Sweeney explained to us, if a piece of ore fell on your bare foot, you'd be crippled for life. For those wondering why this is so important, this is the equivalent of seeing breathing holes in your spacesuit in a sci-fi game. But moving on.
Tale hardly ever seen before in a video game.
Damn, Saturas, what has this book ever done to you? But seriously, the claim they're making about simulation never before seen in a video game was essentially true for the original. But with such titles like Red Dead Redemption 2 and many others attempting to simulate a living world, this is a bold claim, one that I hope will not backfire for this production. There really needs to be a crazy amount of effort put into this in order for this marketing line not to ring hollow or even ridiculous. I hope there is some real effort on that front, which is one of the reasons why I insipidly point out each and every single thing I think is off. It's not because of some hostility or malice towards the devs.
Seriously, I'm just a fan.
During the day, the inhabitants of the colony carry out a variety of activities.
We get a shot at what I think is a lizard, and you'll understand my confusion about that soon enough.
While nature, rich in all its diversity, lives out its...
We see the weird mole rats redesign, which some have stated was made closer to the original by making it more plump. I still think it looks too much like the Fallout 4 mole rat and not enough like a weird wrinkly alien with demonic eyes, but oh well.
its own rhythm. All this gives the impression that this world can exist without the player.
I'm not gonna lie, this shot at the goblins with jokerish smiles is pretty cool, and I would lie if I'd say I wouldn't want to see it in another game. But that's the thing, these look more like something out of a Souls game rather than Gothic.
Explore the colony on your own.
Cool shot.
Enjoy the unprecedented freedom this open world...
I see that Xardas's tower may have been hit with the Mad Max stick, because I don't remember it being riddled with metal rods. Grande will have to wait for a better shot of it, but I really don't think that every single thing has to be up to 11.
offers. In true RPG fashion.
That's an amazing visual, and it really made me go wow. This makes me feel like being in the forest at night can recapture some of that old magic of when you played the game originally, by using the original design philosophy and applying modern effects to it, as you should. Great work on that team.
You decide when and where you go next.
What the narrator says makes very little sense though. Gothic isn't really the you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want kind of game. There are no invisible walls, yes, and there aren't a lot of things technically stopping you from exploring most of the places in the colony, but that's because Gothic use strong enemies way outside of the player's ability to manage in order to stop them, which is a huge strength of the original, and it's just bizarre that they would skip over that in this trailer for the sake of you can climb all the way to the top of that mountain.
Meet numerous interesting characters, understand their inner motivations.
I think this might be Mad, as we've seen him in the old camp trailer, and if so, it is pretty funny that they've chosen him during the segment about interesting characters whose inner workings we'll explore, not gonna lie.
And earn their respect by completing a series of elaborate...
And here we come to Drax, who's been pretty faithfully recreated, at least visually, and I really like the look of his armor. Though, I gotta say, I do hope that they'll at least attempt to keep the characters' personalities intact when writing their dialogue. Most NPCs in Gothic have a clearly defined, if often simple personality, and usually have at least one distinguishable trait. Drax actually has a couple. He's rather taciturn and doesn't speak much unless it's about his trade of hunting, and he's pretty practical, hunting near the exchange site and asking for very simple things of the new guys in exchange for teaching them the basics. He keeps to himself but is nonetheless helpful, even if only for his own benefit. All of this is to say, he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy to say, "I'll have dinner ready by then, and oh, by the way, I'm Drax." The bloke doesn't even introduce himself to us in the original because he's not interested in getting to know us as a person.
quests. How you solve or handle their problems depends entirely on your choices. No matter...
We see the inside of the monastery, and I've gotta say, I'm not impressed with this change. It basically took nothing from the original except for the gate, and even the landscape went from being desolate and covered in sand to just being generic meadow. Why not use the fact that it was a sand-covered area abandoned countless years ago and give us something akin to a desert ruin level, where you could expand on the original ruins of an early medieval monastery now partially buried, but keep the aesthetic? Hell, if we're connecting G1 and G2, then why not have the monastery in G2 Remake be originally a shapeshifter's dwelling that was later turned into a more occult building by the fire mages? It would mimic the historical practice of turning pagan temples into churches, but aesthetically in reverse, which could be really cool to see and explain why the monastery looks so similar to the shapeshifter's one, but so different from the aesthetic Choristo and his mages applied to their dwelling. I'm not saying you have to go with this idea, although feel free to steal it, but just anything that respects the original design would have been preferable. This just looks like a generic fantasy area to me, and there's nothing to it.
When, in what order, or if you do
The big damn Mad Max arena with fire lizards. I've got nothing to say that I haven't said before.
anything at all, the game will always respond appropriately to your decisions.
I've read somewhere that the original heart sound was used as a placeholder, which would be kind of sad. I do hope they use as many of these as possible.
Experience a complex and demanding combat system with satisfying character progression.
The dumb skeleton mage design with silly MMORPG pauldrons.
Overcome your opponents using a variety of melee weapons.
Here's why I was confused about the lizard's design. Are these supposed to be lurkers? Because they look nothing like lurkers and instead look like generic reptiles. If they are supposed to be actual lizards, why aren't they larger? What's with the absolute fear of colors in this remake? And what's with picking the most generic designs possible?
Eliminate them from a distance, or learn the arcana of magic.
Here we see, I think, razors or snappers, but it's difficult to tell because again it hardly looks like either of these designs.
Remember that each type of weapon behaves differently.
We see some mine crawlers in action, and it's an okay design, at least you can tell what it was supposed to be, though then again, there isn't any other crawling insectoid enemy in the game, though I will say, I like the fact that the weird red veins on the ground make a comeback. I hope the giant organic tubes return as well, leaving the player wondering what their use might be for these creatures. The narrator mentions that the different weapon types behave differently, and I think it can be a cool idea as long as it doesn't become some meaningless Skyrim filler that's there only to give you an illusion of differentiation.
Effectiveness depends on training. We're aware that when creating a remake of a beloved title,
Cool gate at an unknown location, most likely a redesigned entrance to the Brotherhood's temple. Kind of odd seeing as they moved to an already pre-existing structure, but oh well, they could have just made the gate.
it is hard to live up to the expectations of its long-term.
What even is that tower? Why would anyone build it like this? Is this supposed to be an orcish construction? It matches the aesthetic of the terrible orcish armor we've seen before, it's just a shame that it doesn't match the aesthetic of actual orcs from Gothic. And if humans build it, why do the human and orc style of building look the same?
Fans. However, we feel there is room to develop the experience further by telling new stories from the colony and expanding on those that die-hard fans have known for more than 2 decades. We are also focusing our attention on enhancing many aspects of gameplay, such as diverse NPC routines and reactions, more complex crafting.
Yes, please. It always felt weird and basically like lying to the player that Huno explains to you how to craft only for you to be stuck making unfinished swords for all of eternity. And it'll be nice to see alchemy, smithing, cooking, and perhaps even other systems make an appearance.
And more rewarding character progression. Despite the passage of time, Gothic remains in the
That's a cool redesign of the Sleeper Idol.
hearts and minds of many players, with the possibilities of Unreal Engine 5 and
That climbing looks like the modern fake climbing, where rather than actually traverse the geometry of the world like in the original, the game instead holds your hand and allows you to climb in designated spots, usually used by lazy devs to waste your time while the assets load. It's an assumption on my part, but I've seen this exact wall design in so many other games that I'd be shocked if it was something else.
a variety of modern features.
The 4 best friends of our main character, looking rather placeholdery, but I'm not going to hold it against them, it is very much placeholdery by design.
Gothic Remake will soon rekindle that love. Whether you've been a loyal fan for years or are just looking for a true
This seems like the Orc Cemetery, and it just looks meh. The original devs used shadows and warm colors to give that place its unique mood, while this is, again, fairly generic looking, and the generic orcs don't help.
RPG experience. Welcome back to the colony.
I do feel that the issue of generic designs and inspiration being largely Mad Max, Fallout 4 and Lord of the Rings is going to keep popping up, and honestly, I'm not sure what else I could say about it. Yep. And so the final verdict is... reserved for the final game.